Thank you.
And what you should be seeing, and you should be seeing the PowerPoint online. One of the things that we're going to talk about first is problems. I think that's more in line with what people are expecting or want to talk about, and what that looks like for the next 4 years, in particular, around talking about achieving diversity in New York State. One of the things that's interesting about the way we're going to use language in this presentation is there is a difference between talking about equality and talking about equity. Equity is tied directly to fairness, whereas equality is tied directly to fairness. And when we talk about individuals who are not receiving the same resources or not receiving the same experiences from the beginning of life, then we're talking about the fact that equality does not exist in reality, right? But when we talk about equity, equity is about providing resources to create an even playing field for everybody. One of the things that's going to be interesting about the inauguration on the 20th is that it overlaps with a very specific holiday, right? So it overlaps with Martin Luther King's birthday. So when we talk about the majority of individuals who voted for the president that's coming in, if we're talking about Black population, African-American population, African population, individual type of class. We're talking about the majority of Black women did not vote for the current president, and the majority of Black men did not vote for the current president that's coming in on the film. At the same time, it's sitting on a holiday for one of the most prominent African-American individuals that is tied to American history. So we take a look at what this means, and then add in the fact that in some states, children are not going to be allowed to learn about African-American history or history of people of color or history around LGBT issues. New York State had a vote on Proposition 1 in November. Proposition 1, when you actually look at the statistics, is more bipartisan than the election, right? So there were a number of folks who voted for the president that's coming in because Prop 1 was identified more as a left-leaning proposition. So individuals who identify as conservative did vote for Proposition 1. And what's interesting about the way that it was marketed is that a lot of conversation was about abortion rights. And people didn't realize that this was actually a law that's put into place that's now been given in New York State Constitution that is tied directly to DEI in a number of different ways and multicultural diversity protection in our state. Now, I don't know what this means for federal funding. So what it means for people who are receiving federal funding, depending on what this looks like nationally in regard to where politics lead us and how we're allowed to talk about diversity in education. So states like Florida and Virginia, states like Texas are having a very different conversation right now about how to talk about diversity in the classroom. But when we talk about protection here in the United States, in New York State, one of the things that we want to take a look at is this language that's talking around, they're talking about unequal treatment. And unequal treatment based on race, color, creed, and religion. So this is really what we see around some of the civil rights federal law, as they currently stand, but are currently also being threatened or shifted, right? There's a lot of conversation about these laws going to the state, and in our state, we have this protection that's sitting in that state that allows for us to protect individuals based on the diversity spaces that they're part of, the different parts of who they are. In the workforce, at school, and then what that means for how we talk about it. In addition to talking about protection in regard to sexual identity, gender expression, and what people didn't realize, and I'm seeing some feedback in the media. Sometimes I have to be mindful of looking at the comment section on any kind of social media, because it does kind of wear on you depending on where your belief systems are. And I can talk about that in my students in class, right? So what that means for us in regard to vicarious forms of trauma when you currently are feeding yourself information that goes against your belief. But people don't realize gender identity and gender expression and protection were in this law. which means that individuals who are trans-identified are protected under this law. And also, when we talk about pregnancy and pregnancy outcomes, which is connected to abortion rights and reproductive health care and autonomy. Now, this is going to protect businesses and programs like Planned Parenthood, right? Now, when we talk about college campuses, there are a number of resources that we provide on campuses. I know that's something on our campus. For individuals who are in transition, we do provide services on campus. So for our students, at Tiphanie Gonzalez, and I know that some of you may not be from our university, but from here at Tiphanie Gonzalez, we have a very open conversation around what it means to be someone who is expressing your gender outside the norm. We have a lot of students who are comfortable in expressing themselves on campus, and I saw real fear after the November election. I can tell you that I was walking through campus and I saw students crying in open about the November election. I also saw this during other elections. When I teach about Proposition 1 in my class, I talk about it right away. One of the things that I explained to my students, one, I'm old enough that I've had political figures go into office, what I'm talking about, the Senate, Congress, presidents who have not been in line with my belief system. At the same time, I also know how to bracket my emotions in regards to the classroom, but not everybody in my state is going to have the same belief system that I have politically. And I'm a very left-leaning field, right? And I personally am not as left-leaning as some of the people in my personal field. So I share my feelings about saying, but I vote for who I want to vote for. Like I don't ever vote down party lines. I do a lot of research, which is partially a hobby, and this is how we got to this point in my class and a lot of people come. But understanding the different laws and how they play a role in how we're supposed to speak in our classrooms, how we're supposed to speak with our clients, how we're supposed to speak with the staff and faculty around it. While taking a look at the layered identities that each person has. Now, when we talk about politics, what we see in regard to the conversations that are in the public or even in the professional forums that we're a part of, is the fact that people are really talking from a place that is personal to them and pushing it into the public, right? There is something that is tied to this law that connects with them. There's something that is tied to this law that makes something I don't want to support, or they want to not support something that has so many different pieces that are connected to proposition. Because there are individuals who voted for this law that would not have voted for it if they were part. And then there are individuals who didn't vote for this law who would have voted for it if they understood the other parts. And it's just about how we had conversations about it in the forefront, right? I won't lie, I watch a lot of YouTube at home. So the way the commercials were moving on Proposition 1 was to vote for Proposition 1 in order to protect abortion rights in New York State. When I actually wrote down the law for people, even in my own personal family, they didn't realize what they were voting for. And luckily in my family, they would have voted for this anyway, right? So we want to take a look at what this means and then what this means for your personal identity, especially if it's pushing against some of your core belief systems. What this means for our students at the college level, especially now that we're in an era where people are very vocal in such a way that we have to be mindful of the way that we as faculty, staff, and individuals who serve the college communities that we're a part of, respond, right? Because sometimes it's actually your personal body, it's like the way your body physically reacts, that things are take attention to. And then what this means for how you identify and how that wears on you too. So we'll actually have a conversation about us a little bit further down. I do want you to see that this is still up on the New York State Senate. Actually, I have to get out of this. What is it to do? I think it's
You'll have to share the whole screen though in order to see that. Unless. Yeah. Yeah, if you share the whole screen, then people will see everything.
I was gonna show you that on your state center website, so please feel free to go ahead and take a look at the website. This is proposal one, so this is where I got this information from. I do encourage you to go take a look at how, this amendment, is now going to play a role in for your particular position, right? Because we're all a little bit different. So when I looked at the list of individuals who are going to come to the organization, it included individuals who are being folks who are staff working with facilities, individuals who are working in some of the programs on campus and in faculty. So when we think a little bit about the diversity of our role, you know, how does this directly connect with you and what you're doing and how you're moving with our students while being mindful of their developmental age, right? So the brain continues to grow and expand between the ages of 25 and 26. They're not fully an adult until 25 and 26. For some of our students, this is the first time they've been disappointed in regard to an election. For some of our students, this is the first time they've been excited about an election. Especially if we're talking about students who are under the age of, right? So, you know, and the majority of our students that are undergraduates are under the age of. So we want to have a conversation that also includes that developmental response. All right, so talking about race, ethnicity, and culture. And I always show it with an upside down pyramid because race is one of the broadest definitions that we have. Now, I've had a student, I've had students, to be honest with you, definitely talk to me about the fact that race is a social concept. That is an absolute fact. So I never will tell a student, no, of course not. You know, race is something that is more concrete than that. No, race is a social construct. It is an incredibly powerful social construct that has created systems of oppression. People have been murdered for it. Entire families, entire cultural populations have been destroyed because of it. There are systems of power that have been designed and created to provide power to some while taking power from others that are directly connected to race. And race is a category of humankind that shares certain distinctions with race. Usually we're talking about it in regard to phenotype. So features that are connected to the color of your skin, texture of your hair. And if you've ever done a 23andMe or an Ancestry.com DNA test, one thing you will probably notice is that a lot of people are a lot of things. Right, so especially when we generationally start talking about where your genomes are coming from, where your DNA comes from, and how you are building this person that you are, right? In regard to your physicality and to what it means in regard to how you identify as race, right? Now, one of the main reasons this is a social construct is because we identify with it, right? So I am Afro-Latina. What does that mean? It means that I have African roots, and it means I'm of Latin descent. And being of Latin descent means that the Latina part of who I am is not tied to race. It's tied to our next definition, which is directly connected to ethnicity, right? So if we're talking about when I identify in regard to my blackness, if I'm talking about race in regard to that, that is only a part of who I am. So I often identify multiracial, right? And I'm of Puerto Rican descent. Colonization is tied to me directly. So when we talk about colonization of the Caribbean, I have roots that are tied to Europe. I have roots that are tied to the indigenous populations of the Caribbean. In fact, the first indigenous populations that were connected to Columbus from the Caribbean. And then on top of that, we start talking about slaves who were brought into the Caribbean and into North America. So I have roots of all three. So what does that mean for me in regard to my race? It means that I am multiracial. And that's how I choose to identify. But when we talk about race, we're often talking about it in the singular form. People identify with one thing. But when we talk about race, we also have to talk about protection, and we have to talk about how we oppress people. So oftentimes when I'm talking about white privilege in the classroom, I often get that hush over the room, especially because I teach every class, right? So the majority of my students are white students. One of the things that I can talk about is if you've ever learned anything about coming into New York State how so many people came through El Salvador into the United States and then moved out. So we're talking about 5 points in New York City. Then we have to have a conversation about Italian Americans, Irish Americans, Polish Americans, individuals who are coming from Europe for whatever reason, why they were leaving their nation that are tied to their nation. If we take away ethnicity and bulk people by race, then when we talk about white privilege, there's a protection that's connected with race. I can definitely start discriminating once I break that apart in regard to ethnicity. I'm sure, without getting into it, we do not need to have a conversation, especially while recording, you can automatically start thinking about stereotypes, or you can start thinking about jokes that are tied to ethnic origin. If we're talking about European population, there are stereotypes that are tied to Irish population, Italian population, Polish population, Jewish population. In fact, if we're talking about individuals who are Jewish by ethnicity, and not necessarily religiosity, which they can get wrapped up together. For someone who is Jewish ethnically, who is not Jewish religiously, they are still feeling the effects of anti-Semitism when somebody identifies them as Jewish, even if they identify with another religion or religion at all. And anti-Semitism is one of the most discriminatory types of behaviors that we see in the United States. Outside of racism, when we talk about racism, African populations receive the most racism according to statistics, right? I'm not saying that racism doesn't affect other populations. Now, when we talk about ethnicity. Ethnicity is defining characteristics of socially sharing cultural traditions that are transmitted over generations. Often, this is tied directly to where the person's family is identified from. So remember I talked about that 23andMe, the primary population that somebody connects to. And when we talk about acculturation, assimilation in a second, acculturation and assimilation will touch on what that means for how these shared belief systems or cultural traditions actually move away from the population. Whereas culture is defined as shared behaviors, meanings, symbols, and values transmitted from one generation to the next. Now, culture is interesting because it's both broad and something that is less broad depending on what part of the culture we're talking about. So being in Oswego, so I'm not from Oswego originally, I'm from New York City. So when I moved here as a student, because I'm an alumni of Oswego and I work here now as a faculty member, I had never heard of something like a pumpkin festival, ever. Like, ever, right? So, and I was like, wait a minute, this is nice. I like this, I like pumpkin figures, this is great. And I'm looking at all this like sizes of pumpkin, people pumpkin figuring, I'm like, oh, okay. That's not part of my cultural upbringing in New York City at the same time. And I make fun of this all the time because, and we have a snowstorm coming tonight, we had a snowstorm yesterday. I've lived up here for most of my adult life. I've told people I've dovetailed on ice. Just got my car back together, while holding my coffee, took my step and kept it driving. If you're currently in the US South somewhere, watching this from a hotel room or from visiting family or something along those lines. So for example, I have family in Atlanta, different kind of experience for a lot less snow. It is now tied to my upstate culture to know how to navigate snow and ice in a way that I didn't even do downstate in New York City. Even though New York City does get snow. But when we think a little bit about culture and behaviors, there are different parts of what that means. In my field right now, there are states where you can choose to not be a client based on your personally held beliefs. And this includes things that are tied directly to culture. A lot of this was connected directly to religiosity. There's a culture to religiosity. There are certain things that you do that are connected to religiosity. I'm raised Catholic. I was a catechist as a teenager. One of the things that is different than when I attend a non-denominational Christian church is the kind of repetition you see in Catholicism, right? So when you're supposed to stand, when you're supposed to kneel, what prayers you say. I still visit the Catholic Church when I visit my family. But when we think a little bit about what that means in regard to culture, I'm from a privileged population in regard to my religiosity. I can pray anywhere in the United States and have very little feedback in in regard to what I'm doing in comparison to my Islamic brothers and sisters, my Jewish brothers and sisters, individuals who are practicing religions that are not as common. So, we have quite a few students on campus who are Wiccan. We have quite a few students on campus. I met someone who identified as a Druid. Like, you'd be surprised what religiosity looks like and how broad it actually is and what people believe in. So when we talk about symbology and we start talking about rituals and things like that, there's things that are connected to the culture that directly ties to religion, and people navigate their lives in line with that culture, right? At the same time, it can be different from house to house because it's also connected to all these other aspects of who you are, right? So the way that you practice religion may be different than another family who practices the very same religion because of other cultural aspects that are connected to where they're from, how they identify in regard to the countries of origin that they come from if they did not start here in the United States or if they're not indigenous people, so on and so on. All right, so I would put this wrapping up, just to kind of get an idea of what this looks like. I'm not gonna sit here too long, there's a lot of that, and we have not as much time, so, but really I want you to think about like what your values are, to hold on to that for a little bit, so that we can have a conversation a little later when we're not recording about what this means for how we advocate and interact with it. All right, real quick. Assimilation and acculturation are two words that we talk about and use often. Sometimes, I think people misunderstand what assimilation and acculturation are. So oftentimes in training, especially if we're talking about diversity training, they'll talk about culture and almost akin to being more like people or valuable. That football metaphor is tied to assimilation, the idea that you're gonna blend in, to the culture that you're moving into. And you're gonna take on the different culture that you are now, sharing with the folks that you live around. So we're talking about the United States, that individuals are gonna take on American culture as their own. And this would be tied to language, even though there's no national language. The assumption that you're going to speak English, and we have a lot of conversations about that on different news networks about how individuals move to the United States without knowing English in particular. And then what that means for how they navigate the system. This even goes down to, issues of the kind of food you eat. When you wake up and sleep, like there's this idea about, like, we're having an entire conversation right now about daylight saving time in the United States, right? So what does this mean for how people move? Now, we also have to understand the United States is a little bit different than other nations. We've had the privilege to travel outside of the United States. You might notice that a lot of other nations use metric systems. A lot of other nations may drive on the opposite side of the road. That in regard to the side that we drive on here in the US. When we talk about these different cultural rules that you have to adopt, there are some that are necessary. So that if you're going to go to the United States, you have to drive on the right side of the road that is connected to us. And that's a safety thing. But when we talk about things like food that people eat, I've had entire conversations about food in such a way that people are like, you know what, I don't like living next to my neighbor because of the scents or smells that are coming out of their home, or their dorm room, right? Or there'll be assumptions or stereotypes or something that is pushed forward based on clothes that folks are using, or we're talking about scents or soaps or something along those lines that are appropriate in regard to the cultural population they're coming from. And that's because there's this idea that folks are supposed to assimilate. In reality, most people who are coming into the United States or individuals who are from populations historically, especially if you are second generation, if you're first generation American born, you're living in a system that is acculturated. So when we talk about acculturation, that means that there are traditions that are coming from your family system, from your community that are tied to the country of origin, that the family system or the local population came from and then moved into the United States. In fact, acculturation is so common that in a number of cities or states, especially when someone talk about some of the mega cities, there are small pockets of neighborhoods that are considered the little version of a nation. So like, I'm from the Bronx in New York City, there is a little Italy in the Bronx. And then there's another little Italy in Manhattan. There's a Chinatown in Manhattan. If we're talking about, and if I were to go to Montreal in Canada, there's another one. So like when we start talking about different populations that are tied to ethnic origin, now we're talking about those communities, oftentimes the signage will be in a different language, or they'll be in English and the language of the primary population that moves into that community. So I have a family member who lives in an area that is largely Korean. And you'll see street signs that are in English and then underneath directly are also in Korean. That is tied to acculturation. This also goes back to the idea of there's no primary language that you have to learn in the United States. But also in these areas, you'll find that there are opportunities for connection with regard to programs that are being provided, restaurants that are available, grocery stores that are available that now hold the traditional food or traditional holidays or traditional events that folks grew up with in their countries of origin are now going to be available to the population. So you'll see a large population moving there. So when we think about acculturation, it can be something that's tied to neighborhood. It often can be something that's tied to a dwelling or apartment, right? So you walk into somebody's space and then you'll find that there's a lot of things that are connected directly to how they identify with regard to their ethnic population or the cultural groups that they want to have represented for them, right? So that would be okay. I do want to talk about the word intersectionality. We say the word intersectionality often. It was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. Kimberly Crenshaw is a lawyer of African American descent who is who identifies as a woman, and what she talks about early on is who she is as a Black woman, and then what that means for her intersectional identity, especially when she talks about the present. So when we talk about the layered part of who you are, really taking a look at all of these things that are you. So oftentimes in my classes, I'll have them go ahead and write it down, and it's an activity that's just for them. Some folks will go ahead and share later, some will. And I want them to identify 5 characteristics that are tied to them. So if I have to go ahead and draw them as a character or put them into a story, what does that mean for how they want to be identified? And oftentimes, I have folks who will identify those areas that are often threatened the most first. Then I'll often see that they're a daughter or a son, or they'll talk about their religion. They'll talk about something that is really tied to their identity and forefront. Sometimes they get mad at me because I make them really five, and they feel like there's so much more. So when we talk about intersectional identity, really thinking about what this means for you, what this means for your students, right? Because one of the things that's interesting about bias and discrimination and prejudice is that people often will look at you and make assumptions based on their own personal biases, and then they will discriminate based on those biases. And then they will use those discriminations to navigate you until you actually share something about yourself, right? So because I'm racially ambiguous, what people see is that I'm not white, right? And if they don't know my name, I've been identified as Trinidadian. I've been identified as Indian, as in India. I've been identified as Native American. We are in upstate New York. So I've been identified as biracial. People wondered if I had one African American parent and white parent. So because I'm racially ambiguous, one of the things that is interesting is that I'll get discrimination from these different populations. I was 17 when 9/11 happened. I was in New York City. I was in my first year. I was literally a freshman at St. Francis College, working for transferred here to the field. And I had a gentleman stop me on the subway and tell me, I'm so sorry for the way that my people are treating their people. He assumed that I was of Middle Eastern descent. And he was apologizing for how Americans were treating me. Now, no one had said anything to me on the train. No one had moved away from me on the train. I hadn't actually had any event happen on that trip, except this person who decided they wanted to apologize. Well, what's interesting about this individual is that they were Latin descent. He had a very heavy Latin accent. So I don't speak a lot of Spanish, but I've spoken up to let him know, like, okay, so what are our people doing to us, right? And he would be like, oh, he's like, well, you're Latina. I'm like, I am Latina. He's like, oh, okay. And then he just kind of walked off. And so, you know, and it wasn't discriminatory in the sense of he wanted to do me harm, but there was a huge assumption of what was happening to me or what I was experiencing on the subway, likely because of the things that he was watching on the subway. So when we think a little bit about what this means, we do want to pay attention to the intersectional identity of people and what that means for the individuals around us, and then how we perceive others. And then think about what bracketing is. And if you don't know what the term bracketing means that everybody has bias in them, right? You have assumptions that you make. The idea is to kind of put them on the back burner, and then you engage with the individual that you're working with, or the individuals that you're working with from the very neutral space, right? Now, this doesn't mean that in your mind or in your head you haven't made an assumption. It's about pulling back that assumption until you receive more information. But I do often tell my students, especially because they're individuals who don't work with other people, you have biases. Everybody has bias. Everybody has thoughts that aren't the best, right? You might catch yourself every once in a while like, oh man, I shouldn't have that. That was terrible. I shouldn't have thought that. But this idea of perfection, sometimes we need to take that step back and remember we're human too. And biases sometimes are actually created because of experience. There are fears that are created because of experience. We have to be mindful of that. We are individuals who serve the public. So as individuals who serve the public, we have to push all of that to the side. And then do our best to not let it bleed into the work that we're doing. And hopefully not bleed into our personal lives also. Right? So like, you know, not making assumptions about individuals because they are showing something that is against your core values. All right. Typically, we would have this as a conversation. I'm not going to have this as a conversation because of the fact that we are recording. But I found this online. I don't have a citation for this. I'm not gonna lie to you. I found this through a search engine like a decade ago, and I've been consistently using it since I taught. And it's a check your privilege video. And I've actually gone back and taken a look as to why some of these are here. So if you do have a question about any of these areas of privilege, feel free to ask just at this time. And I will try my best to go ahead and explain it. Because they're all valid, right? Now, if you're not familiar with the term cis, oftentimes we'll use the term cisgender when we're talking about individuals. It's a Latin word for thing. So individuals who are cisgender identify with the sex that is identified on their birth certificate as their gender, right? So when we start thinking about sex and gender, they are two different identities. They're two different terms. Sex is directly connected to genetics. It's tied to your reproductive system. Sex is, people get mad at me all the time saying it, sex is not binary. No matter what folks are trying to say or what they're trying to put into the law, there are individuals who have more than one set of reproductive organs. There are individuals who genetically have differences that are not XX, that are not XY. There are individuals who are XXY, some individuals who are XYY, and that's without getting into other aspects of how secondary sexual traits come into who we are, right? So, you know, so genetics aren't as simple as people like to say. Let's just look these things. The one that I get questioned about the most in class is not a redhead. On the very top of this line, and that has to do with how rare natural hair actually is, right? non-redhead is also one of the, populations that are publicly discriminated against the most. Right, so we start talking about, conversations around attractiveness, we start having conversations of, there are individuals who will openly go, especially talk about women with red hair, and assume that they have a fiery temper. They will get questions about whether or not their hair matches other hair on their body. And just very openly having these conversations, in public. There's been conversations around men with red hair, in particular, like, there was a lot of conversation about her carrying her growing up. In particular, and then tying it back to whether or not men with red hair are physically attractive. And again, there's a spectrum of attractiveness and what you consider to be attractive, to be real. We talk about attractiveness, and there are individuals who find individuals that you don't find attractive very attractive. So like, now the majority of individuals find a person attractive, then we have this interesting conversation around attraction, attractiveness, and that. And there's some really interesting research around attractiveness and success in the workforce. And people getting promotions for work that may not be at the same level as individuals who are not identified as attractive within the gender population that they identify. So there's a lot of interesting conversations to have in this space. I do want to talk a little bit about the standard accent. The standard accent is the one that I see the most diversity with. When we talk about accents for individuals from nations that are identified as nations of color, I see more discriminatory behavior. If I'm talking to someone who is having a conversation about an accent that is from a nation that is a white identified nation, especially if we're talking about British accent, Australian accent, Italian accent, or French accent, there seems to be more positive belief systems or feelings toward those accents in comparison. So, there's diversity with all of them. When we talk about the standard accent. The standard accent, however, we're usually talking about American accent. And then there is a lot of diversity around that. So depending on the region, there is real standard accent in the United States, right? So a lot of these people will code switch, so they'll pull their accent, but it's really hard to hide depending on the state that you're from, the region that you're from. Even if we're talking about a different thing. And that's about getting into language, right? So, which is a whole other conversation. So this is my favorite model, taking a look at systems and what this means for our student populations or students for our clients. So this is Breton methodological model, and this is taking a look at the different systems that we're always navigating. So we're always navigating yourself, your microsystem, which includes your family, school, systems that are the closest to you, for the ones that you didn't know. The mental system has some of those same systems, so in a way that's not as intimate to the relationships that you have with your social relationships with your family. It doesn't mean that you're close to everybody in your family, right? So you have the folks that you don't see as often. And then when we talk about the ecosystem, then we talk about social services, neighborhoods, mass media, local politics, and how law impacts the ecosystem. But the law that impacts that ecosystem impacts your mental system and directly impacts your life. So when we're taking a look at Prop 1, so going back to our conversation around Proposition 1, and what that means for New York State. Right now, if you're not federally funded, if you want to have a program or you want to do something that's tied to diversity. And what's interesting is I work with a lot with other educational programs in other states. They're able to do their DEI programming because it's going through one of their organizations, like their Black Student Union, their Latin Student Union, but they cannot be funded by the school. Now, what does that mean for individuals professionally? That's a part of what they do. If someone is getting paid for that work, they might find that there will be penalties because of providing or creating a presentation at the school level for the population or for their faculty staff. So you see students actually putting on presentations now. or organizations putting on presentations now, but they can't be funded. So there's a scholarship that goes to those organizations, or there is some sort of money that's getting connected back to a program. So like we have an educational opportunity program here. And we have the teacher opportunity worker, the whole program that historically works with students of color. What does that mean for these kinds of programs that are getting federal funding? If they want to provide diversity programming or diversity training on campus, there'll be a balance that we're going to need to see and see how it plays out here in New York State after the inauguration on the 20th, right? Now, as it stands right now, New York State is a very safe state. In regard to SUNY, our chancellor has been very open about being supportive about diversity programs. We're talking about a number of presidents of the universities. There's been a lot of conversation around protecting diverse population. Not every state has those privileges, and right now, Prop 1 actually falls in line with those privileges. Right, so when we talk about the exosystem, though, we now need to wait to see what the law says and what that means for shift to the way that we teach. But I can tell you attitudes and ideologies that are happening in the macro system have impacted our university. Right, so I've had conversations with students. And oftentimes it's an interesting thing because if I'm having this conversation with them, because I speak the way that I do in class, I'll have somebody connect with me directly because either they're feeling threatened by somebody in the classroom, or and I'm not talking about threatened as in they're being threatened, but being threatened by their belief, right? So it's an opposite, it's in opposition to what they believe we're talking about for our field, or that it makes them feel unsafe in regard to the person being the same, right? And then on top of that, you know, I've had individuals who are trying to figure out their place because they don't feel safe sharing their beliefs because it doesn't feel like it's right? And when we talk about politics, there's this really interesting conversation about what this means for the conversations in the classroom, because they can get heated right away. But even more so, what does this mean on campus when they're not in the classroom? Because people tend to like, they'll go ahead and they'll ease it down in the classroom, but they know they're being evaluated in the classroom. But what does this mean for residents involved? And I was RA the entire time that I was at university, right? Well, not really the entire, I was here like months before that. But even before that, I was on the hall council, and I don't even know if they do that here on campus. But I was on hall council, do like, yes, we do. I was on hall council, I was in RA, I'm a counselor now, makes sense, that shit. But we're talking about what that means for conversation in that space. Oh, it's a very different reality than what we're seeing in the classroom. And then if we want to go even further, we'll listen to the conversations that are happening in the classroom. Right, so then we have the dining hall, the rest hall, and then what's happening outside. The macro system plays a role on ideology. People are growing up with these ideologies, and on top of that, we talk about the First Amendment in regard to freedom of speech. Not a true understanding of what freedom of speech actually is, right? And so, you know, when we talk about freedom of speech and freedom of speech and those kinds of protections, what does that mean when someone's feeling threatened in the face, right? But we can't feel threatened in the face in the true sense of they feel like harm's gonna happen, or somebody is saying, you know, what we often use the metaphor of you don't pay fire in a full fear, right? So you don't scream fire in fear because it's community. I've seen events where those are talking about First Amendment rights, and you know, they're also concerned about the fact that there's faculty that watching the things that are being written down or the things that are being said. And the reality is we have to actually watch to see if there's danger present. If somebody's going to say, I want to harm, or I'm going to cause havoc on campus, or I'm going to do this, that's actually not protected speech. And they're like, but that's not what my intention was. I don't know the purpose there. You have to be mindful of what that looks like. Now with the macro system, that we're in right now, there is some interesting gray areas that are publicly happening in regard to, you know, what First Amendment would actually protect. And that's why Prop 1 in New York State was so interesting, and not only how we were talking about it, but the fact that it happened, right? Because those strong value systems are tied to the core identity, and then they're pushed into the family system, they're pushed into the school, they're pushed into the street, and so much so that we're having very active discussions where you have two populations that are shouting, or you have two different kinds of populations that are protesting that are going directly against each other. That is different from what we saw during the civil rights movement, but it also kind of echoes what we saw in the civil rights movement. And I'm not from the civil rights movement era, but I did have the privilege of being allowed to learn about it. And there are individuals who are not going to have that same privilege to learn about it directly from the school system in such a way that it really detailed the atrocities that were happening that led to the war. All right, I know this has racial microaggressions on it. I'm gonna adapt it a little bit just because of what we're talking about. There's microaggressions and the three kinds there are. Now, microaggressions is an umbrella term, and people don't realize microaggressions is an umbrella term. There are three kinds. There are micro insults, micro assault, and micro invalidation. Micro insults are behaviors or remarks upon that convey rudeness, insensitivity, or demean a person's racial heritage or identity. When we're talking about racial microaggressions, we're talking about micro insults or any of your other identities. A person might not know they're saying something that is prejudice or discriminatory. The one that I receive a lot is has that second population, so second class citizen. I'll get a lot of and then we get micro validation there too. So where are you from?
I'm from Watertown, so, you know, when I describe it to people around here, I say like northern New York. I'm sorry, not from here, I say northern New York, all of Canada.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're talking about Watertown.
Yes.
Right? When we start talking about Watertown, just from Oswego, what are some of the assumptions that you
I honestly don't know. I have.
if people have any guess what Watertown was, or what it looks like?
Well, yeah, I don't know. It's not something that I've had to think about.
No, so you're not from here,
Mm-hmm.
right? So growing up, being a student that was here, when people talked about Watertown, I thought it was dying military days.
Oh, yes, okay, yeah.
Right?
Mhm.
So, you know, you drive to Watertown, you drive too far, you're gonna end up in Canada, you have your papers. Like, are
Yeah.
you okay? I've also been told people wouldn't welcome me racially or culturally or ethnically in Watertown,
Mm-hmm.
right? I still to this day have not driven into Watertown, right? So that just happened. But even just, you know, taking a look at what that means for this area, is anybody online or anybody familiar with the term of sundown town? Okay, so Watertown to me is not a sundown town. However, there are sundown towns that are really close to Oswego. I had a conversation with another faculty member that I'm not going to name online about an experience they had in a nearby town where everybody was watching them because they were persons of color. I was like, these are towns that historically are known because somebody will go ahead and stop you. Well, oftentimes people identify law enforcement, especially if you're there after sundown. So why are you in that? Like, why are you there? You're not supposed to be there. Why did you stop here? And I stopped in what a area that's known as sundown town. It's known for being a sundown. Because I was like adamant of coming up to the city. I was like, nope, I have to go in here. And people watched me until I left. So when we think about what that means for micro insults and micro assaults, there's a combination of things that are happening in that space and micro invalidation, right? So you can have all of these microaggressions happening at the same time. What's interesting is that I already knew about sundown towns working. People downstate already were telling me, especially from communities of color. Now, when I do some of the work that I do with the pre-freshmen, especially for pre-freshmen who are from New York City, who are students of color, that conversation is had almost every time. A fear of Oswego being one of those towns, right? Without understanding that diversity that Oswego has built into. But when we talk about micro insults and micro assault and micro validation, especially if we're talking about micro, right? Because they're often unconscious. What people don't realize is happening is that they're getting compounded, right? So like you're having this assumption about who you are, and they have this over and over and over and over again, and it starts wearing down. What's interesting, I'm not gonna name it, Facebook, but I was on Facebook like 2 seconds before you walked in. And they were talking about somebody who was on our campus as a student, who is a celebrity now, who didn't say it, right? And they were like, yeah, no, they didn't like being upstate. I don't know this person personally. And they thought that, you know, that the folks here were all like country people. And I'm like, what does that mean? That's one. Two, depending on where you're coming from, this does feel more townish or suburban, even though it's a city, right? I'm from a mega city, so like there are more people in some of the building complexes that I've been in than a large part of Montreal. Even though Montreal is built up now, so it has a lot of population now, especially when I started in 2002, right? There's a lot more greenery, there's a lot more animals that learn things, right? So, you know, when we start thinking about the environment shift is different. And then assumptions are made if you've never been in the other environment. So when we talk about micro insults, sometimes they're happening because individuals are trying to connect and they're using that bias or those discriminations in a way to try to build connection, not realizing it's causing harm to the other person, right? And they're being offended by it. We're talking about micro assault, however, micro assault are often unconscious. So these are usually those discrimination or those prejudices or those racism or those racist comments that people directly are saying to harm you, right? So we're talking about racial assault or racial insult that are tied to micro assault. Using a racial epithet is a huge one, right? You know, there are epithets or discriminations that people aren't as familiar with unless you're tied to a particular population. So we're talking about discriminatory language. Every person is tied to a population that has discriminatory language or biases that directly harm something that is tied to it, right? Right? As a woman, the fact that I am working for some people is a hard well. Like they're like, wait a minute, what kind of job do you have? Shouldn't you be married by now? Where are your children? I'm like, there's things. I'm like, I don't know you. Excuse me. Like, and it's one of those things where my worth isn't tied to children that I'm supposed to have. That has nothing to do with you. And then on top of that, I'm taking a look at my worth in regard to my womanness as being tied to being able to reproduce or choosing to reproduce. You know, so, and these are public conversations that folks will have on their first meeting, especially when you have a married couple, who doesn't have children and they're of the older age, which is more common now than that, having your family or having children in your 30s, or 40s even. So like, when we start thinking about those micro assaults, you know, when it starts stepping into really getting to the space where you want to cause harm. So moving from that micro insult, that questionable, like, I'm not sure if they're doing it on purpose or not on purpose, to, you know, telling someone that they're worthless because now we're getting into micro assault territory. You're not confident, you're not able, right? And then we have micro validation. These are often unconscious also. The one that's really interesting for me that I probably have the most, I have the most feedback on is when we start talking about colorblindness. And Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter. So the use of All Lives Matter is interesting because it's often unconscious. So during a Black Lives Matter rally, I'm sure people are quite familiar with the fact that All Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter would be shouted in return. Now that is a clear micro-validation. What they're trying to do is invalidate the experience or argument that individuals of Black you know, that are identified in regards to Black population or even their allies are saying the Black experience is different than the experience of other individuals in the United States. They're receiving more racism, they're receiving more prejudice, and then not as much justice. But when we talk about all lives matter, yes, all lives do matter, but that's not the conversation that we're having right now. But if you're using all lives matter to stop somebody else from saying Black lives matter as a way to stop the conversation, that's marginalization. Same thing with Blue Lives Matter. Yes, Blue lives do matter. Our law enforcement and their safety does matter. However, you know, if you're again using Blue Lives Matter as a way to stop the conversation, to say, you know, Black lives just don't matter. You know, this is a conversation we don't want to have. To erase the argument. That's marginalization. And it's harmful to the population that is talking about the fact that there's injustice in the Black community, right? Because they're feeling again that they're not heard, and this is a population that is often discriminated against. This is a population that is often receiving prejudice and it's listening to racism and has been for generations, right? Because they were really talking about Brown versus Board of Education. Brown versus Board of Education was in the 1950s, right? The 1950s, not that long ago. I know to some of our, to be fair, I did just watch something where like you are of an older age if you were born in the 1900s, and I personally don't know how I feel about that. We're like, we were born in 1999, just so you know. I was like, wow, thanks. But when we think about the 1950s, oftentimes that's our parents, our grandparents. They're in that age range where they were born before the 1950s or around the 1950s, right? Because the reality is we're talking about, you know, roughly, you know, moving into that 65, no, 70 years old, right? So if someone's over 70 years old, so I have someone in my life who just had their 72nd birthday. You know, my grandmother's still living, my grandmother's in her late 80s, right? My grandmother, it was before Robert Board of Education. Like, it was not legal for her to do certain things. So, you know, when we think about individuals even that are in their 90s, there are folks who are alive that are in that 100-year range, you know, they would not even be allowed to sit next to people of color in certain cases. So, you know, it's a very different experience. And then you learn from the generation before you. And then they learn from the generation before them, and that trickles down. All right, so I'm gonna actually, there's a slide here. That I'm not gonna get into because I do want to stop, but we can have a conversation. I do want to talk about this briefly. I want folks to get familiar with the term paralanguage. And that paralanguage speaks to the different way that we use language across cultural groups. So, you know, being mindful of your own personal cultural group and what that means for how you identify loudness, how you identify being quiet, and then there are other cultural shifts or changes between people in regard to even if we're getting into conversations with outside apparently with our closeness, you know, what's close to you, Americans can have a big bubble. We don't like people as close to us as folks who may be coming from other nations. So for us, we have a lot of individuals who are international students on campus. They may come from a population where it's quite common to be a lot closer in regard to physical contact. Whereas if you're in the elevator, you might find that it's uncomfortable for you, but not as uncomfortable. Because I'm a counselor educator, I have teaching for my clients that because their clients might actually come a little bit closer. And then there's, when we're talking about paralanguage in regards to what's loud or what's quiet, I was laughing because I come from a culture group that's identified as loud. And there's this idea or assumption that there's not a European population that has that same stereotype. And then I was sitting and thinking, this is Italian descent. And my Italian students were like, I was like, how many times have you heard that Italians are loud? And they're like, yes. I was like, okay, so like it's the same exact stereotype that's in my population that it is. This also would be a conversation later around individualistic and collectivistic population. So there's this idea that European populations are not collectivistic. That's not true either, depends on what population you're talking about. So, and also how much they actually connect in regard to their family systems, what that means for family lines, the role that the parents, the grandparents, and great grandparents play, the home play in decision making. Like that's there's a lot there in regard to understanding. But we're talking about, paralanguage and what it means to have a conversation that's appropriate and inappropriate, in regard to tone or, volume. There are things that you may want to research if you're working with a diverse population of students or individual participation. All right, I'm done.
Oh.
And I'll send you all. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna stop the record.